Hiya, so this is the stuff that I use. It's a decent sized bowl that you get your hands into nicely. You need a decent set of scales. Scales are important. It's important to be able to accurately measure things. Timer is important, so that's a good thing to have. In terms of the actual dough, just standard table salt, my starter, flour, obviously strong bread flour. I tend to use an organic white. I find the Dutchy stuff pretty good, but any decent sort of white, strong white bread flour. And I've got some wholemeal flour, which I also quite like to use. The Canadian wholemeal flour is particularly strong, so it actually works pretty well. In terms of a proving basket, plastic bag, a scraper, two scrapers. This one here is for scraping the surface, this one here for scraping out the bowl, but I don't tend to use that quite so much anymore now. I really just tend to use my hands. And a mixing sort of silicone mixing spoon, and that's about it really. So let's get on to the measuring. One of the things is the hydration level. So these are the numbers that I tend to use. So when they talk about hydration, they're talking about the percentage of water to flour, basically. So this, all these hydration levels here are exactly the same percentage. Actually, they're just different size loaves. Whereas for me, that's a smaller loaf, 400 grams. These are flour, 500 grams of flour, or that one's 2 small loaves. Obviously, you could do two large loaves with doubling up that. You can double them and just bake 2 loaves. So it's basically just these two, and they both are about, they're just below 70% hydration, which isn't, for a sourdough, is not a particularly wet. I mean, it's wet compared to other doughs, but it's not that wet compared to some of the, I have seen people making sourdough with 100% hydration, so the same amount of water to flour. It's quite hard to work with, and you certainly have problems shaping. But I've certainly done 80% hydration, and you end up with a much wetter mix. I'm not sure that it gives you that much better. You get bigger holes in it, but generally this is a hydration that I quite like using. But you can experiment yourself. So within that, so I'll put it on the scales. Mixing bowl on the scales, wait for it to settle to 0, and then I lob in I'm going to make a small loaf, so I'm only going to do 270 water and 400 flour. So, and for that I know that it's just, it's supposed to be about, I think about 9 grams of salt. So for me, I tend to just put a teaspoon in for a small loaf, teaspoon and a bit for a larger. It's pretty much, well, that's it, 9 grams. Okay, so I'll re-zero that, the scales again, and then I'll put in 270 grams of water. I'll try and get these reasonably close, but it doesn't really matter that much. So that's 275 there, and then I've got my starter. So the starter, which I've had in the fridge, I always keep my starter in the fridge. It seems to work fine, and it pretty much lasts for, you can leave it for, I've left it for a couple of months and not done anything to it at all, and then you come back and reinvigorate it and it seems to work again fine. So with this here, I'll just give it a good mix up. I don't do any. A lot of people actually get the starter out the night before and they'll give it a little feed, get it all bubbling. I feel that it makes much difference. I have done that, but for me it didn't seem to make a lot of difference. This starter seems to work fine cold. It's been stagnant for about a week, this one now. I've not done anything to it, not added to it or anything. So I'll just gloop some in, and so I'm vaguely looking at the scales. I didn't zero them, but then again I know that I started at about 275. I've added about 60 grams of starter in there. You can do anything from, well, that's about 90 grams of starter. You can do anything from I don't know, probably 50 grams of starter to 100 grams of starter. The reason I tend to do slightly more, slightly higher amount, is nothing to do with the dough. It's to do with the starter. It's the fact that I actually want to feed the starter, and because I don't want the starter to increase in volume, whatever I take out I'm going to put back into it. So if I only put 50 grams of starter in there, then I can only put 50 grams of stuff back into the starter to keep that going. So if I remove 100 grams, that means I can put 100 grams of stuff back into the starter. So it's really just to keep, I mean, you could put 50 grams in there and you could chuck 50 grams in your recycling bin and then reinvigorate your starter. The starter needs to be fed every now and then. It needs a bit more fresh flour, basically, to keep it going. So that's that bit. Then zero the scales again. Put down to 0. Now I'm doing 400 grams of flour. I like a bit of brown flour, whole wheat flour in my bread. So I'm going to put 100. I'm going to put about 100 in this one. So I've got 100 of whole milk, and the rest of it is going to be it's going to be white flour. So I've got to make this up to 400 grams. And of course, exciting stuff, that's the milk and flour. A tiny bit over on that. That's it anyway. So that's that done. The only other thing is, let me just stop this a minute and then I'll come back to it. So the only other thing is that I do like a bit of caraway. I've tried some other stuff, fennel, stuff like that, but the caraway seems particularly nice in sourdough. So I'll put about a teaspoonful of caraway seed. I'll just lob it in at this point. So the other thing then is the starter. So I've got my starter here, and I'm just going to quickly feed it now. So I'll zero that again. Good. And basically the mix for this particular starter, all I put in is white flour, nothing else, white flour and water. And starters, they require a 50-50 mix. So it's just whatever you put in water, you put the same in the flour. I know that I removed about 90 grams, so I'm going to try and put in about 40-45 grams of water first. So I'll put in up to 50, or maybe 50 grams, and this spoon. I would recommend spooning your flour in because it's very easy just to go oops and put a great lump in there. And then I'm just going to bring this up to 95, and that's probably about right. Okay, so that there, and now I'll just mix that up with this spoon. Give it a good old mix, scrape the stuff off the bottom, the sides, get it all going. And that's it, and then that's going to go back in the fridge for next time, and that's it. That's all you have to do for that. that, I'll just lob in that bowl. And that I tend to just, I don't know, some people say seal it, I tend to leave it open. So there's a little bit of a gap there, but I've got a lid on to stop dust and stuff going in, but that's just going to go back in the fridge anyway. That's that. Right, so the mixing. This here, I've only put this on here just to try and clean the spoon off a bit. That's all. The only thing I would say about this, since I've been doing this, the dough, the flour and water mix is a remarkable stuff. The dough, once you start handling it, you realise how powerful it is, how strong, how sticky. Once it gets a bit of gluten in it, it doesn't really dissolve away. You can't sort of dissolve it in water. It's quite an interesting substance. I don't think it's a good idea to chuck much of that down your sink. So generally, I try to avoid putting lumps of dough and stuff down the sink, because I think it probably is going to clog up my drains. So I tend to try and, like utensils like this, just get as much off as you can, because I know I'm going to get my hands in there anyway. So this here, I know that I've got the starter at the bottom in the water, so I'm just going to swill the water. I've got my fingers underneath the mass of flour, and I'm sort of mixing from the bottom up, if you like. I'm just making sure the starter gets well mixed into the water. All this water is room temperature, cool room temperature. You're not heating the water or anything like that. The point about sourdough is it all happens slowly and relatively cool temperatures. It's not you're not putting this in airing cupboards or anything like that to warm it up. You're trying to keep it cool. So the first mix, all you're trying to do is to get the whole lot incorporated. So I tend to keep moving the stuff around, and you get your fingers full of stuff that is unavoidable. And you're not trying to develop any sort of gluten structure, if you like. So you're not really stretching it or anything like that. I don't think it probably matters. But anyway, all you're actually trying to do is to mix the two things together, to give yourself one shaggy lump. And however you do this, you can just squeeze it and pummel it, and try it. You can be reasonably rough with it at this stage. It doesn't really matter very much. You're just trying to get the two things incorporated together. And so there you go. Now I'm trying to get into one lump, which isn't always as easy as it sounds. This is probably the most work you're going to do. Obviously at this stage you've got your hands covered in stuff, so, and as you see, it's quite a sticky dough. Just puddling it around here, just try and pick up some of the, and I'll just scrape any excess stuff. I'm scraping off the sides, excess flour, mix it down into the dough. Now, you're going to end up with sticky hands at this stage, and so yeah, that's kind of it. So you're going to end up with hands like that. There's not a lot you can do about that. You can just go and run them under the tap so they're all wet, bring them back and mix a bit more. In fact, I'll show you that. So I've just got a wet hand now. So I've just wetted it all, and you can just try and squeeze that into there and try and get more off your fingers. But you never really seems to clean. Never really seems to clean your fingers on this particular time. So the thing I do is, because I don't want to shove that down the drain, more than anything. I don't really care about wasting it that much, but I get a knife and I just scrape it off my fingers and just try and get as much of the dough off my fingers as I can. And that sticky stuff. Like I say, all I'm trying to do is to make sure that I put as little of this stuff down the sink. When I wash my hands and the utensils, I wash it over a bowl of cold water, by pouring water out the tap into a bowl, and I tend to leave it in the bowl, let it settle, like washing up bowl, let it settle, and I'll come back to it later. I'll pour off the water, and hopefully the bits of dough will be left in the bottom of the basin, and then I just put that into the recycling bin. So that's it. So the only other thing is I forgot to mention was the plate. A lot of people could put cling film over. I don't want to waste plastic, so just put a plate over the top. We've just find a plate that's the size or bigger, and just use that to stop stuff from drying out. And obviously, yeah, it's much better than using constant cling film all the time. So that's it for this stage. Any other things, I get my clock and I'll put 2 hours on that and press start and leave that on there. So now this is my daytime. This is when I'm doing a loaf in a day. So it'll all happen today. By the end of the day I'll have a loaf of bread. There is a nighttime regime which is slightly different, but this one here I like to just mix through the day. And so the next processes are the stretching. So when you do this stretching and folding thing that you do with sourdough, which is slightly different to kneading, has probably the same reasons for doing it, but anyway, you do the stretching. Because the dough is so much wetter, you couldn't really knead it. Anyway, so you do the stretching process. When I'm doing the daytime one, I do it all through the day. I do it all through the bulk fermentation. So bulk fermentation is this bit here. So we've put it in there. It's now starting to ferment. It's got the starter in it. The bulk fermentation we'll do for about 12 hours would be a good time period to do it for. So you've got to start this early in the morning, but through the day I'll try and come here and just give it a fold every hour to 2 hours. So I've set the timer for 2 hours, but in reality if I walk past it and it's an hour and a quarter, it's 45 minutes left, so it's had an hour and a quarter, I'll give it a fold and then reset the timer again, and then at 2 hours the beeper will go off and I'll go, oh yeah, I should have given that a fold. I don't think this is a crucial thing. I think you just fold it at some points in the day. You do, a few of them through the day. Probably you'll end up doing 7, maybe 6 or 7 folds through the day. They're very quick. You can do them anytime you like. If you want to go out, you can leave it for 4 hours and come back and do a bit. It doesn't really matter. So that's why I set the timer. So in about an hour's time I'll come back. That was the first mix. So the bulk fermentation, once you get past the bulk fermentation, you're then into the shaping the loaf and the final proof, but we'll talk about that later. That's it for now. Okay, so as you see we're an hour and 10 minutes in, so cancel that. So wet your hand, just wet hand, get underneath it and pull it away from the sides, go around. Now this, because it's the first stretch, so I'm pulling it out and then plonking it on. The first stretch, this one can be quite rough. You're doing quite a lot of stretching and you find that actually changes what it's like. in the first stretch, and I just tend to keep going round, and as you go round it'll start changing consistency a bit. It's not really sticking to my hand very much already, and so now I'm really just getting underneath it and pulling it up from underneath, so I'm doing this sort of motion. I only really do this on this first stretch, and it's really just to try and get to amalgamate it properly, get it all properly mixed, and as you go round it's clearing the bowl, so the bowl's getting cleaner and cleaner. And this is quite rough, and I only do this on the first mix. As you go on with more and more the stretches later on, and I get softer and softer with it. And on this one I don't really care, I'm just stretching it, mixing it. I'll probably do this for a few minutes. It's alright, just to take a quick phone call. So I'm really just doing this and getting myself a nice ball going. You see I'm lifting underneath it, just getting cleaner and cleaner. I keep moving around the bowls and doing it. I mean, that's probably enough. You see you've got quite a nice ball there, not too much stuff on my hands. If you want to, well you can, so you can re-wet your hands and then do it again. You will find it will make it a bit more messy doing that. See, it's starting to, the surface is starting to break up again. Doesn't really matter, but it has cleaned some of the stuff off your hands. But basically that's it. So plonk the lid back on. I put another 2 hours on my timer on there, and then again I'll come back in between 1 to 2 hours, anything between 1 to 2 hours, and do the next one. Okay, we're about an hour on, just over an hour on again. Doesn't look much different. So wet your hand. Let's do this with a wet hand. And now we're really just picking up the sides, stretching it out, and giving it a bit of a shake. Put it over. And I'm starting to get a bit gentler with it. It's changing its form, it's becoming smoother and more elastic. It's become very nice to work with. It's pretty clean, you know, and that's about it really. Yeah, so we're getting a pretty clean hand now. Doesn't really put much on there. Again, 2 hours on the timer. Just stick that on so when I walk past it another time, anything between 1 to 2 hours, and I'll give it another stretch. So now we're getting to the point now where we're going to shape the loaf. So first thing I do is, this is a bit of rice flour, and I use rice flour, and I also use a bit of standard corn flour in there, and just make sure, and the rice flour, it seems to stop it from sticking better than the wheat flour. So I'll make sure I get a good coating inside there. Okay, so that's that. Now I've got this here, and because I had to go out, I didn't stretch it for the last couple of hours, so it's actually grown a little bit. And it's got some air in it. Try not to put too much flour down, but you need some on there and some on your hands, and then just prise that away. And we're trying to be gentle with it now, so I'm still doing another fold just to get it off the sides. I'm bringing it in, and I'm trying not to lose too much of the air that's in it, and so I'm just going to pull it out onto the surface there. So if you find that difficult to do that, then use this and use that. That's what that's for scraping this. However, as I said, I don't tend to use that so much anymore. So now we've got the dough down there. As you see, it's got some sort of bubbles in it. I'm not going to try and get those out, but I am going to try and put a bit of tension into the surface. So I've got a bit of flour here, and put a bit of flour on this, and so I'm just going to do a fold there, just lift the edge up and stretch it out, pull that over, and then basically I'm going to do that on 4 sides. So stretch that out and pull that up, stretch that out, pull that up, and the last side I'm going to do that, and then I turn it over, and then I'm just going to put a bit of tension into the surface, right? Put a bit of flour on there, a bit of tension into the surface. So I'm just, you see, I'm just dragging it off to put a bit of tension into the surface there, and get that lifted up and put it in that way. Okay. So I've got it there, and it's already a bit, that's already grown a little bit. That's you know, often when I do it, it's a bit flatter than that. That is actually quite aerated. So I'm probably not going to leave that for too long. You can leave that anything from an hour to 4 hours in the proving stage. And what I would say from my experience generally is that if you leave it for a shorter period of time, like 1 hour, it doesn't expand very much, but when you put it in the oven, you get what they call oven spring, so the thing where it bloats out, and you get quite good oven spring, and you tend to get big holes. If you leave it for a long time, proving 4 hours, might be overproved, you'll find that will have expanded quite a lot. When you put it in, you won't get so much oven spring, and you won't get big holes in there. You'll get a more uniform dough. That's how it seems to work anyway. Don't quite know why. Another thing I do is any flour that's on the surface here, I'll use this scraper to just pull all the flour, any flour that's there together, and as much as anything, because I don't want to put it down the sink, I'll just sprinkle that over the top, make sure it doesn't stick to the plastic. So, because this room is actually quite warm, because I've got an Arga in here, I'll go and put this in a cooler room. The whole thing about sourdough is you're not trying to do it warm, you're trying to do it cool. So I'll go and put this in a cooler place. So one thing is that when you cook this stuff, you've got to cook it in a very hot oven, as hot as you can get it really, maybe 240, 240 degrees C. and you need steam in the oven, and the steam gelatinizes the gluten. So you develop gluten by stretching it. The gluten that's on the surface, when you have steam, it gelatinizes that gluten, and that's what gives you the crust. So you need to have moisture. Now some people put a tray of water in the oven to give them steam. I personally have always used a Dutch oven, so that's basically a cast iron casserole. So this is the cast iron casserole that I use. See it there? So this is the casserole that I use, and basically when you put the bread into the casserole, it produces its own steam. You can use them either way up. I tend to use it that way up. I tend to like having it there, and then put the lid on it. But the other thing is that these, because they're big lump of cast iron, they actually take a long time to heat up. So I've got an Arga. So as I've got the Arga, I'm just going to put this in the Arga now, so that when I come to it in maybe 2 hours time, when I choose to cook that, this will definitely be up at temperature. I mean, it's a good idea to leave it for 40 minutes to get up to temperature. Another really useful piece of equipment actually is one of these. It's a thermometer basically. So basically it's got a laser on it. You point the laser at an object. You probably see the laser there on the object, and then you look at the reading and it tells you the temperature of that object. And it's actually that's 20 degrees, and it's actually pretty accurate. And it's really useful because you can put that in the oven, and then you can actually point it at the side of it and you can see what temperature it is. And you need these to be at least 200 degrees, but 230 is probably better. So I'll put this in the oven now, so that if you've got, I mean in the summer I use a gas oven. I turn it up high, I have that in there for 40 minutes probably before I actually go to cook my bread. So that's that. Okie dokie. So this is about two hours on. So as you can see, there's some quite big bubbles in here, and so I've decided that it's now time to bake it. So just out of interest, I've got my thermometer here, so I'll do a quick. So that's about 230 degrees, the actual casserole, Dutch oven. So I'll just take this out now. I'm going to try and keep everything as hot as possible. So move that over there. Get the lid up there. Watch your hands because these are properly hot, these dishes. Turn that out onto there and just release that there. And I tend to use a sharp knife, but most people use razor blades, so I'll do that. Now on this one I'll just do a cut like that, and so put that in the oven, put it towards the back, and that's that. I'll set the timer for 30 minutes, so I'll give that 30 minutes. I say that's as basically it's as hot as you can get your oven, more or less. Gas mark 9 on a gas oven, top of the Arga, 30 minutes, and we'll come back in 30 minutes and see how that's done. So that's half an hour, so take it out. that's it. It's it was a little bit overproofed probably, so it is a little bit flatter than it could be, but anyway, it's that's be quite nice loaf. And I'll stick that back in the oven. It's been in there for another 8 minutes. So that's it. That's the finished loaf. And I shall put that up here to cool overnight in a warm place. And that will, well, you could eat that in about an hour's time probably. And that's it. Oh yeah, I'm afraid someone's already been at it this morning, but that's what it's like. Good crusty loaf of reasonable sort of crumb on it. But you can see the so it hasn't got, it's not a huge holy texture, but it's actually pretty good and tastes pretty nice. And a good crusty crust on it. That's it. Thanks. Bye.